so I could really do it. And I got fantastic training. I got to learn what the system was like. And what I really got to learn was an idea of the WWF style of putting together a match and pacing it. And so getting to learn that structure early on, I think was a huge benefit, to where I would try to force logic into matches instead of just cramming in the spectacular.
Right. Yeah, because I do hear a lot now that, you'll always hear it from old timers complaining about the new generation, but it's this, they're saying there's no selling. Everyone's just doing spot after spot, and the storytelling isn't there where it needs to be. But then you do see it on TV where, they're doing a lot of spots, but there is storytelling in a lot of it. Whether there is as much selling as there needs to be is a whole other question.
I watch a lot of this old wrestling, like black and white wrestling, just recently, last few years. And so it's dawned on me that the vets who've been giving me advice were no different than I was or the generation today, in that, Ric Flair, if I were to tell you, like, okay, so that Ric Flair spot in the corner, where he gets whipped to the corner, you know what I'm talking about, where he's going to whoop up and then run down the apron and up we go. And that's the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Name one spot as so far as routine or shtick, this that would lead to that would lead to the other, that Nature Boy Buddy Rogers ever did. He never did a spot. He never had a routine. And that doesn't mean that Ric Flair is nonsense and just doing a bunch of spots. It's just a different type of brilliance, and that's how it evolves. And big band music ain't popular anymore, and things just change. And I think wrestling's awesome still. I understand the point of these old timers, but like myself as well. But you got to realize that what you did was a bastardization to the old timers too.
True. Yeah. There are so many people, especially, you bring up the music analogy, where in the 80s and the 90s, when the synth and the computer started to be more prevalent, people are like, well, that's not music. You're not playing actual instruments. Well, you are. You're just using a different kind of instrument.
Yeah. It's just this is what constitutes an instrument now. Well, how is pressing this button any different than pressing this? Well, there's a string attached to that. Okay, if you want to make distinctions, but the kids like it, So I don't know. That's just what I guess the market dictates, and what the creative young minds of today wish to do.
Exactly. Obviously they're still being influenced by what they grew up on, or stuff that they maybe don't know about, and they're going back and checking out, like you said, you're checking out the old black and white stuff, which, I think a lot of people need to go back and check that stuff out, where it's definitely something to watch, and it translates in a different way now, because you have to not think about wrestling in today's way of doing it. You have to think about how it was back then. Because just look in the crowd. You'll see people in suits and ties, and you hardly ever see that now. You always have people in, wrestling shirts, shorts, and flip flops. Sometimes just gym shorts, look like they rolled out of bed. But the time that it was happening was completely different, and they really thought that was real. All of that, they really didn't like each other. They really, beat up each other's wives, which obviously wasn't the case. They were all, working each other, but people thought that it was real back then. And now, obviously, with the advent of documentaries and social media, and everything's out there for everybody, that they know that for the most part, everybody's friends and everybody's cordial. But, once they get between the ropes, then it's a completely different story.
Even back, so I watched one recently, Big Moose Cholak versus Bearcat Wright. Oh God! So I'd only heard of my grandfather telling me that his dad liked somebody named the Moose. So I discovered the Moose. It was fantastic, and it's just ultimately the finishes. These guys keep bouncing into each other, like tackles and falling down, and tackles and falling down, and then finally Moose picks up Bearcat, goes for a slam, it just falls backwards, 1, 2, 3. But there's no cutoff, there's no shine, cutoff, hope spots. There's none of that. It's just developing, It's just two guys out there. It's developing. Whatever it does, it unravels to this finish. But there isn't like how a movie structure, the 3-act play that pro wrestling insists on today. They didn't insist on it back then, and the crowd went crazy, and it was different expectations. But boy, is it fun, and to see the people jump out of their seats for such simple stuff. And I love Russ Davis, just listening to his voice. I love it. It's great stuff.
I love that old stuff too, and it's always fun to go back and check all that stuff out. And I love, like I said earlier, looking at the crowd as well, because they're for the most part, fourth person in the room, where they make the match. Like we obviously saw during the pandemic time, things were a little weird because there wasn't that crowd reaction, there wasn't that interaction. And I've heard that from wrestlers too, where there's like, I don't know if this is any good or not, because there was no reaction. I now have to then go straight to social media afterwards to see if anybody even enjoyed it or not.
To me, it's not only that, it's utterly pointless. I think pro wrestling without an audience is missing the point. I think pro wrestling is catharsis for an audience, and I think it's an interaction. I think that the performers need to either find a way to embody, treachery or righteousness and feed off the crowd to do the righteous thing at the right time. I'm not taking this crap anymore. Slap the mat and hit the heel. You need the crowd to feel that, because the crowd feels it. You feel it together, and then you know when the time is to go. Football you can do without a crowd because it's real.
Sure.
All these other things you can do without a crowd because they're whatever. Ours needs a crowd, insists on a crowd, because the whole thing is the crowd. It's the emotional connection between performer and spectator. But the spectator is the performer is the spectator, and I think it needs a crowd more than anything else. I think it's utterly pointless without a crowd.
Stand-up comedy is the exact same way. You just having somebody up there telling jokes, fine, but they have to know. I mean, the same thing with pro wrestling. You have to know when to let it breathe. So you tell a joke, you allow the fans to laugh, and then kind of settle again, and then go back at it again. Same thing with pro wrestling. Hit a spot, let them soak it in, and then either allow them to come back to where they start cheering because you both are kind of laid out. And then you go, one person gets back up and then goes back at it again.
I imagine comedy is the same as well, in that if you're an experienced comedian and you go out there and the crowd is reacting this way, then you start to adjust what it is you do. I know for pro wrestling, up to a certain point, because there is television, there is all that,
right.
But we hit the beats accordingly, and we can adjust based off of this crowd. And so I imagine a comedian would do the same. If they've got enough confidence and experience and enough of a repertoire, they could go out there and, they're biting on this, let me take it this way. Would that be fair to say, John?
Yeah, I mean, like, let's say, so you're in LA and I'm here in the DFW area. What works here may not work out there, and vice versa. Same thing that may not work in Spokane, Washington, or Des Moines, Iowa, or Miami, Florida. Like, every place is going to be different. Same thing with pro wrestling. Whatever happens here in America, I mean, obviously different pockets, but the South is going to be different from the North. The West is going to be different from the East. Pacific Northwest is on its own thing. And then you try to go over to Mexico. That's not, the same wrestling's not going to work. You try to go to Japan, same wrestling's not going to work. So you have to, I mean, which is, from what I've heard, different and weird about Japan, is that they're very silent because they're very appreciative and they do treat it as a sport. And so they'll cheer a little bit here and there, but from what I hear and what I've seen on TV, they are not obviously as raucous as they are here in America, or especially over in Europe, where their sing-songy chant, I think, makes every show better. But
agree. It makes it. These people go crazy for soccer, and that's a cheap joke. I shouldn't be doing that as an American, just to spiff at soccer like that. But I think you get what I mean. Like, it's, to us, the average person, it's going back and forth. I know there's a point to it, but it just looks so back and forth. But when they're singing, like, I would love to be there. I don't even need to look at the field. I'd be in the crowd drinking a beer, singing with these guys. It looks like fun.
Right.
Yeah. Audience.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to bring it up later, but I'll bring it up now since we're talking about audiences and kind of the way that things are supposed to flow. When you started your promotion, and then you've been in the WWE and you obviously been in other companies, do you feel that there's a sweet spot for how long a show should be? Because I've been to the last 13 or 14 WrestleManias, obviously not counting 2020. And, starting in 2020, they started doing 2 nights. Well, that's good. But the year before when we were in New York, it literally ended the next day because it ended after midnight and it didn't start till 2 or 3 in the afternoon or whatever. So do you feel that there is a sweet spot to not have the crowd have enough lull and to get fatigued? Because, you're there for about 10 hours. You're going to get fatigued, and especially if, let's say, you only ate once the entire day, or, that day I think it was a little drizzly rain, and so, the environment will fatigue you. The matches will fatigue you. The up and down roller coaster of emotions fatigues you. Like, do you feel that there is a sweet spot for kind of how long a show should be?
So what I'll say for me on a small level, running a show, I want 100 minutes. I want 100 minutes. That's it.
Wow.
For a big, I want it. I think anything more than that is, people start to get a little restless. I think it's any longer than that in a movie, people start to get restless unless, of course, it's an event like a Lord of the Rings or a WrestleMania, where these are big events you've been waiting. But if it's just a show that you're going to on a Friday, I like my show to start at 8:30, and if I could be done in 100 minutes, that means these people can be out and hit the bar that night. And that's ideal to me. For a show like WrestleMania, oh my God. I do love the idea of 2 nights. I think that's the way to go. I think it was even one of the photographers years ago suggested the idea to me. So like the idea of it floating around in the ether, of making it more like a concert, or not a concert, but like a EDC or any one of these festivals, to make it a multi-day event. I think it's great because people are flying in from Australia and anyways, I don't know. As a fan though, do you like 2 nights?
So it's a weird debate thing. I think it's not really a debate. It's just the way you enjoy wrestling. So like you and I are fans of all pro wrestling. So we'll watch everything. There are fans that go to WrestleMania just for WrestleMania. Then they'll do, the Hall of Fame and SmackDown that Friday night. They'll do all the Access stuff. They'll do the Raw after, which unfortunately the last few years hasn't been as good as the years before, but that's life. I enjoy when it was one day and it was all the WrestleMania in one day. Yes, you get a little fatigued, but you get to consume other wrestling throughout the rest of the weekend, as opposed to now where, maybe you have to fly in on a Thursday or try to get in that Friday so that you can catch certain things. Like the GCW's Collective had done a fantastic job of having amazing events and just completely different styles. We have, Josh Barnett's Bloodsport. You have Effie's Big Gay Brunch. You have Joey Janela's Spring Break, which is, pulled in some amazing talent and amazing things that people wouldn't, have expected or thought they were even looking forward to. I think it was 2020 when obviously unfortunately the pandemic happened. They had booked Orange Cassidy versus Minoru Suzuki. That's a dream match I never thought in my entire life of putting those two together, but I wanted to see it. Unfortunately, it still hasn't been done since, but I was so excited for that match. Well, unfortunately, the pandemic happened. It didn't happen. The match still hasn't happened. Hopefully one day, maybe Tony Khan will do a Forbidden Door, because it's big fantastic for that. But it's just matchups that you just wouldn't things to put together, and then you get super excited about it and it happens. But now we have